Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to wait just another minute or two to give a few more individuals the opportunity to log on. Thank you. And hopefully you can see the announcement in the chat. You are muted due to the number of participants. So if you have any questions, we're going to invite you and welcome you to utilize that chat feature today to put any questions you may have in there. We will be gathering those questions as we go and have time at the end for Q&A. So utilize that Q&A feature and welcome, and we'll be back momentarily. Okay, we will go ahead and get started and want to welcome you today to our presentation where I'm joined by Noah Brown, who is our PMO Director for StateRAMP. As we talk about StateRAMP, we're going to give you an overview as to kind of how StateRAMP came to be, where we are in the process, what StateRAMP verification looks like, and how you can get involved. But first, introductions. My name is Leah McGrath, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director for StateRAMP. And I'm going to invite Noah Brown to introduce himself now as well.
Hi, I'm Noah Brown. I am the PMO Director for StateRAMP. My background comes from federal government in the DoD, working on FSMA and NIST auditing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get to it. So StateRAMP. If you haven't attended a presentation with us yet today, or if today is your first time attending a presentation, welcome. What is StateRAMP? So StateRAMP is a nonprofit 501c6 membership organization that was founded really during the heart of 2020 and launched in early 2021. Our mission is about promoting best practices and education and bringing states and local governments together with the providers who serve them to recognize a common set of standards and method for cloud security verification. So you may be aware of FedRAMP. There is a vendor verification requirement in the federal government space. Through the creation of FedRAMP. FedRAMP was founded about 10 years ago, and it is a federal government agency that works to verify the vendors' cloud security who work with the federal government. But FedRAMP is only eligible for federal agencies and for companies who do business with the federal government. So that left states and local governments and the providers who serve them without a common method for verification. And that's where StateRAMP fills in, and that's why StateRAMP was created, was to provide a standardized approach, a shared service model that states and local governments could leverage, as well as the providers who serve them, so that providers could benefit from a verify once, serve many approach to verifying cloud security. You can learn more about StateRAMP and see more about our documentation at stateramp.org. But I want to tell you a little bit about kind of how we were formed. Well, I mentioned FedRAMP because some people are familiar with FedRAMP and it gives a good baseline for understanding what is StateRAMP and our goals with StateRAMP. There are some differences, mainly how we're organized. So StateRAMP, as I mentioned, is a nonprofit. And on this slide, you can see all of the different individuals who have given a lot of their time and input helping develop the formation of StateRAMP. So the steering committee members and the board members that you see gave over 1,000 hours in 2020 trying to answer that question, what if? What if we could bring states and local governments together with the providers who serve them to create a common method for verification of cloud cybersecurity? What would that look like? How would it be organized? How would it be funded? What would that process entail? And so the individuals that you see on the screen before you were very integral in helping walk through those questions and really inform the development of StateRAMP. So our governance is published at stateramp.org. If you go to stateramp.org to the documents page, you can see our bylaws, our committee charters. But in essence, what you'll see is that we are governed by a majority of state and local government leaders with input from private industry leaders as well to ensure that we're hearing from all the stakeholders and creating a process that works for everyone. We do have standing committees that make recommendations to the board and steering committee as well on our policies. So we have a standards and technical committee, and you can see the members who are part of each of these committees. Our standards and technical committee has responsibility for annually reviewing our policy documents and making recommendations for improvements or edits to the board of directors who ultimately adopts our policy documents. Our appeals committee, and we may talk about this later as well, but our appeals committee really serves as that adjudication board. So if there's ever an exception requested or a disagreement between a provider and our program management office or a government agency, then that issue or that exception, that appeal, goes before the appeals committee who makes the determination for how to move forward. Then we have our nominating committee, and our nominating committee has responsibility for making recommendations for future board and committee member participation. So that's how we're organized. Now here is how you can get involved and what participation looks like today. So we launched StateRAMP in January of 2021, and it has been a really exciting year, and getting to know so many of you and having an opportunity to meet with state and local governments across the country, as well as so many providers, large and small, who serve state and local government. The dots on this map represent the places where our individual members are located who represent government. So to be a member of StateRAMP, if you work for a government, if you're appointed official who has responsibility for security or procurement or privacy or information technology, then you can be a member of StateRAMP and play a role in helping ensure standardization in cloud security and verification of cloud security for the providers that you work with. We do have 165 individual government members, and the application process can be found at stateramp.org/register. There is no fee for government to participate. We also have a provider member category. Now, providers are typically companies who offer or utilize a SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS solution that serves states and local government. And so we do have about 52 provider members today. We just opened that opportunity up earlier this summer. And so welcome you if you have interest in joining. That is a $500 membership fee per organization but there is no limit on how many individuals from an organization can be involved. So 52 members represents, I think, around 225 individuals who represent those providers and have been involved with StateRAMP. In terms of government participation of our vendor verification requirements, Arizona and Texas have made headlines in 2021 for the movement they've made and leadership really in adopting vendor verification requirements and models. And so we are really excited to be working with both the state of Arizona and the state of Texas with StateRAMP and TexRAMP to recognize StateRAMP authorizations as part of their vendor verification requirements. So that is a snapshot of what it looks like right now for government participation. And we look forward to working with many of you as well. So our mission and charter, what we're talking about today is how does StateRAMP go about verifying cloud cybersecurity for vendors, and what does that mean? So this slide that you have before you is just a snapshot at a high level of how StateRAMP works. So it really begins with the states and the local governments who adopt policies that require the suppliers they work with to meet minimum cybersecurity standards. And I can tell you that our process is, or our standards are based on NIST 853 Rev 4. And our process is modeled in part, as you will see, after FedRAMP. But it is really designed. There are some differences, and we'll point that out. There are some differences because it is designed for the state and local government market. So it begins with states and local governments adopting that policy. What we found during our discovery is that the vast majority of states and local governments that we were talking with, if not all, have adopted a cybersecurity framework based on NIST. That's the widely recognized National Institute of Standards and Technology. So that was a place where we immediately found some commonality, and it was a good place to start for us. And so that is the baseline of our baseline standards as well, is that NIST 853 Rev 4. One of the questions I know that we will receive, so I'm going to answer it now, is what about Rev 5? I've told the story before that truly the day our steering committee gathered to meet to adopt our baseline standards. And you can find our baseline controls on our website. But the day we met to adopt those baseline controls was the day that NIST 800-53 Rev 5 was published. So we all acknowledge that with some humility. But our plan right now is to incorporate Rev 5 controls at some point into our baselines as well, but the Standards and Technical Committee has advised that we not get ahead of FedRAMP. So we are watching to see what FedRAMP's baseline controls will look like, and we'll continue to proceed accordingly once we see those baseline controls. So we've got our cybersecurity policies adopted, and then it's up to the providers who wish to do business with states and local governments to engage a third-party assessing organization to conduct an independent audit. And what that looks like. So our third-party assessing organizations, that acronym is 3PAO. To be a StateRAMP 3PAO, you need to be a FedRAMP 3PAO and register with StateRAMP. So you can see all of the StateRAMP 3PAOs on our website. If you go to stateramp.org, in the members category and drop down to assessors, you can see a listing of all of the 3PAOs who have registered to be a StateRAMP 3PAO. So that third-party assessing organization has responsibility for completing an independent audit, submitting that security package and audit to StateRAMP. We manage the program management office, the PMO, and you're going to talk to Noah here in a moment with our PMO, who will get into some specifics. But at a high level, the PMO reviews the security package and makes a recommendation for a security status. That status is then published on our public website on the authorized vendor list. And just last week, we published our first authorized vendor list. So that was in mid-September of 2021, we published our first authorized vendor list. And if you go to this website, you can see some descriptions there. You're going to see a number of providers with their products listed as either verified or a progressing status. So this is similar to, if you're familiar with FedRAMP, and similar to FedRAMP's marketplace, but again, designed to meet the needs of state and local government. So I want to talk about these security status categories for a moment. StateRAMP recognizes kind of two buckets of security statuses. One is verified and one is progressing. So what does it mean to be a verified security status? What you're going to see, and we'll talk about more detail, are some milestone statuses of ready, authorized, and provisional. So if you achieve, or if you see a provider who has a product that has achieved a verified status, what that means is that product has had a 3PAO submit an audit. That provider has submitted this full security package or the ready security package to the PMO for review. The PMO has verified that yes, this security package does meet the minimum requirements, and therefore the provider is listed as ready, authorized, or provisional. To maintain a verified status, providers do have to meet minimum continuous monitoring requirements. So this is not a one and done audit or a one and done verification. We're really trying to shift that discussion and that mindset or culture around cybersecurity to be one of continuous improvement and continuous monitoring. So that's part of what's involved to be a verified offering. One of our other statuses is progressing, and our progressing statuses came about really after quite a bit of discussion with our steering committee back in 2020. And it was important to the steering committee to recognize the work that providers are doing to progress toward a verified or an authorized status. That's because we know that this is a shift for state and local government, and a shift for the providers, many of them who serve state and local government, to have to verify, to prove that you're meeting these cybersecurity requirements. And so we wanted to recognize the progression. So the progressing statuses are active, in process, and pending. So what it means to be active is that's a provider who is actively engaged with a third-party assessing organization for a readiness assessment review, or that it's kind of pre-ready. So they're in the process of working toward a ready status. In process is a status that recognizes a provider who has engaged a third-party assessing organization for the full security assessment review. So they are working toward that authorized status. We'll talk more about this in a moment. And then pending is for a provider who has submitted either for a ready or an authorized status. They've submitted their security package and documentation, and the program management office is reviewing that documentation. So pending is they've completed everything, they've submitted it, and it's in the PMO's hands. If you go to authorized vendor list, we welcome you to take a look. This is a public website that will be updated weekly. And I'm going to hand it over now to Noah, who can talk a little bit more detailed about what it takes to get on this authorized vendor list and to stay on this authorized vendor list. And then we can talk a little bit about how we also work with state and local governments to continue to manage their third-party risk through this process. Noah?
Thank you, Leah. So first, we'll walk through the steps for a provider to verify their offering. Here in a little bit, we'll go through in a little bit more detail on the StateRAMP fast track process for federal authorizations. But for those who are coming into StateRAMP and approaching a NIST audit for the first time, the steps are that provider decides to become a StateRAMP member. So they go out, they register on the StateRAMP portal. They engage a StateRAMP approved 3PAO to begin their assessment. Now, when they begin their assessment, they're either completing a ready review packet or a full security authorization review. That will depend on where you are with your provider and your authorizing official. So if you have an authorizing official already in tow and you're ready to go through the full audit, you will come through and engage your 3PAO for a security audit review. They will go through and conduct the entire assessment. And once that documentation is completed, that comes to the StateRAMP PMO. We conduct our review, and it also goes to the authorizing official for the state you're doing business with to sponsor that product for authorization. That authorization review packet is completed. If all requirements are met, and we'll go into this a little bit more here in a moment on the types of authorizations, but then you move into an authorized or provisional state. So to move into authorized or provisional, you do require an authorizing official or sponsor. For the complete ready review packet that is going through the readiness assessment report, that is provided to the PMO, at which point the PMO conducts that review and the PMO is able to award a ready status to that provider at that time. Next is the templates and resources. So on stateramp.org, we have the security policies, documents, and templates. That includes assessor templates, provider templates, and then also policies and procedures. That includes the security assessment framework, the data classification tool, the baseline security controls, the minimum mandatory requirements for ready, and the continuous monitoring guide. So we have all these documentation resources out there to help you as you try to go through and prepare yourself for a StateRAMP audit. Just trying to make sure you have the resources you need to be able to engage this and be successful. So once that service provider has made the decision to list their product on the StateRAMP authorized vendor list, and they want to verify their cloud security, you need to identify the impact level at which you're going to engage the audit. The higher the impact level, that is the more sensitive or critical that data or that system would be. So that includes low, moderate, and high. We also have a data classification tool out there that can help you map to those requirements or those impact levels. For StateRAMP, we are offering StateRAMP Low, which will generally map to systems that involve publicly available data. StateRAMP Moderate, which will generally map to systems or data that involves confidential data, such as PII, PCI, PHI, or systems that are critical to government functions. We also have StateRAMP Low Plus. This was part of conversations during committee meetings in 2020. There's quite a few examples where a Low Plus option might be of interest. Systems that store less sensitive PII, or they transmit, store, or process public data, but they may interface with a more sensitive system. In those scenarios, a state may require a Low Plus or Mod Minus option, which is what led to this concept. And part of that is looking at the controls and subcontrols of the low impact level with additional controls, and then further developing and validating that at a later date, and then eventually publishing that baseline. The high baseline is only for those who are going through the StateRAMP fast track process and who have a federal authorization at the high impact level. Once again, we do have that data classification tool that's out at stateramp.org under templates and resources. And then you can see the baseline controls document under the same stateramp.org templates and resources page. And this list will include the minimum controls required by impact level. So the security status progression, ready, this is a status that's maintained by meeting the minimum mandatory requirements. So that's demonstrated by a readiness assessment report completed by a 3PAO. Again, no contract or government sponsor is required for that ready status. A provider that is StateRAMP ready indicates that that product meets the minimum requirements, and you're likely well positioned to be able to comply with the full authorization. Next is provisional. If there's a provider who meets the minimum requirements and most of the critical controls, but not all of them, the sponsoring government may choose to list their status as provisional, and the goal will be for that provider listed in provisional to be working towards becoming fully authorized. We discussed this with state and local governments. The idea is to give providers an on-ramp, as well as giving them time to get their product ready before initiating or at the time of initiating that audit process. Finally, is authorized. It's a status that indicates the product has met all the required NIST controls by impact level, and the provider has completed all the necessary documentation. They've completed that 3PAO security assessment report. Again, keep in mind a government sponsor is required to be listed as authorized or provisional. And to be authorized, both the StateRAMP PMO and the sponsoring government must agree the product meets the requirements to be listed as authorized. So government sponsors. Eligible government sponsors include any SLED government official or employee who serves in the role of Chief Information Security Officer or their designee and are a member of StateRAMP. Part of being a government sponsor, it's agreeing to designating an information security authorizing official. They'll be provided access to the secure portal to review the documentation, review the PMO recommendations and the associated artifacts, and to accept, reject, or make suggestions for modification to our recommendations, as well as continuous monitoring and annual renewal. StateRAMP is designed to meet the needs of state and local government. It's important to keep them front and center in the process and ensure that the baseline requirements are meeting their needs and that they accept the risk profile of the systems with which they're going to use. While the PMO is there to provide review in all cases, the state or local government official becomes the authorizing official. So the PMO acts as the central point of contact, the consistent application of standards. We're there to help ensure timeliness of communication and ensure that all requirements are being met. So once we go through that review process, we summarize the findings, we make a recommendation to that authorizing official for a status change. So for StateRAMP Fast Track, if you have a federal authorization already, whether it is a ready status, an ATO, or a PATO, the required documentation is that security packet as submitted and approved. So what will happen in the PMO process is once you go in and request a StateRAMP Fast Track audit, we will set up a call with you and we will actually go through between the PMO and the service provider, reviewing that documentation as it's pulled down and then uploaded into the portal. It includes the entire audit packet as well as the prior 90 days of continuous monitoring, at which point the PMO will go through and review the boundary, the architecture, the documentation, RAR or SAR, depending on the status you will be coming through. And it is to, validate that that system is completed all the requirements according to StateRAMP's controls. And it's important for the integrity of the verification for the state and local governments to ensure that that documentation is valid. We do accept the documentation in federal format, as well as continuous monitoring requirements as those are submitted as well. Continuous monitoring requirements. So whether you are completing the StateRAMP Fast Track process or you're coming through as a new audit in the StateRAMP program, CONMON is required to maintain a listing of ready, authorized, or provisional on the authorized vendor list. This includes the centralization within the PMO of that documentation. So that includes POAM updates, the monthly vulnerability reporting, the annual audit, and then we on the PMO side are reviewing that documentation and providing summary updates to the authorizing official if you are in a authorized or provisional status, or we are doing our own review of that documentation if you are in a ready status to ensure that you are meeting the requirements of the continuous monitoring definitions within the program to make sure that it's not just a one and done audit. We're having a monthly review of that documentation and those vulnerability reports to make sure that you are maintaining your security posture. Finally, to list products on the StateRAMP authorized vendor list. The products must meet verification requirements as adopted by the board of directors. There are fees for reviewing these security packages that are paid for by the service provider to StateRAMP based on the security status listing that is being requested. So that includes $2,500 for a ready review, $5,000 for a security assessment review, and then $5,000 annually for continuous monitoring to maintain that listing as we go through and conduct that review on a monthly basis, again, to ensure that that security posture stays where it needs to be.
Okay, thank you so much, Noah, for walking through that. I know we've had a couple of questions, but just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the benefit of StateRAMP to the states and local governments who are working with StateRAMP. So, as I hope that you've seen through our presentation, we're really trying to create a framework for verification and continuous improvement for cybersecurity that can serve both states and local governments as well as the providers in creating the shared service model, a verify once to serve many approach for providers. So rather than seeing all of the states create their own vendor verification system, we can leverage StateRAMP as a shared resource for all of the stakeholders. And through that centralized process, really learn a lot, I think, about best practices and how to help serve states and local governments and the providers better. We are committed to ongoing education and best practices. And so if you've ever met with us or talked with us, you've probably heard us say, hey, we know we're going to get a lot right and we're going to get some wrong. And so we want to hear from you as we go We are a very accessible and I think reasonable team with our committees and our board, and certainly working with the PMO. So as you have questions or if you get into this process, we really encourage you to engage and let us know kind of how things are going for you or what we can do to help better support you through this process. One of the questions I did want to kind of ask Noah to elaborate on is how we can work with states and local government. So the vast majority of our government members represent state agencies or state governments. And we're working with the state of Arizona and the state of Texas on an enterprise level, but starting to have conversations too with other agencies and states who are especially interested in that continuous monitoring that you talked about. So Noah, could you explain a little bit about how continuous monitoring reporting will work when we're communicating with our state and local governments who are sponsoring the providers? I think you're on mute, Noah.
I am.
There you go. Try again.
So for continuous monitoring for state and local government sponsors, the service provider who has been through that audit and are now in the continuous monitoring phase will be providing their plan of actions and milestones document and then their vulnerability scanning information to the PMO on a monthly basis. So our role in the PMO is to take on the majority of that work on behalf of the state and the local government, reviewing that POAM, reviewing the vulnerability reporting, and ensuring that requirements are being met according to StateRAMP's continuous monitoring requirements. So that is high vulnerabilities are being closed out within 30 days, moderate within 90, and low within 180, as well as reviewing any issues related to benchmark or baselining of systems, or issues or findings found within the audit on a continual basis. So the PMO team is reviewing all of that reporting every month and providing an executive summary of that information with the goal for state and local government to be able to go in and easily view that executive summary and see if there are issues or problems that they should be concerned about. If there is, the PMO will be engaging with them directly. But our goal is to do the work and do that review on behalf of the state or local government and ensure that when they come in to look at that reporting, they have an easy to digest, available snapshot of where that system's at and if they're still meeting the requirements or are they not.
Absolutely. And I know one of the questions we hear is who will have access to viewing that information. And I know that the short answer is for providers, no one has access to that information that a provider has not granted permission to, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how that works.
Sure. So as they go through the audit and then they eventually move into continuous monitoring, we have the designated representatives from the service provider who would be providing that documentation and working through the audit process and continuous monitoring. We have the members of the PMO as well as the state sponsor who is originally provided access to conduct that authorization review and eventually approve the system. After that point, any additional state sponsors or service providers, or the list goes on, that a service provider would want someone to have access to their system, we have to have approval from the service provider before any access to that reporting is made available to anyone else.
Thank you so much, Noah, for answering those questions. And if you can't tell, we've sort of moved into the Q&A stage. So if anyone has any other questions, please be posting those into the chat feature so that we can try to answer those questions as we go. One of the questions that we heard is, do you still need a sponsoring agency if you are utilizing the StateRAMP Fast Track, meaning you have a FedRAMP authorization or a federal authorization that you're going to leverage in order to be eligible for the StateRAMP Fast Track process? And the answer is yes, you still need a government agency in order to be listed as that authorized status. Without a government agency, you still can be eligible for the StateRAMP Ready status, which demonstrates that you meet the most minimum mandatory requirements for ready. And for that status, you do not need a government sponsor, but if you're wishing to be listed as StateRAMP authorized, you will need a government sponsor to kind of accept and the PMO's recommendation for status there. Noah, or I'll invite Ellen, who is also on this call, our account manager, who many of you may know or have interacted with if you've interacted much with StateRAMP. Any other questions that would be helpful to ensure we cover today?
Sure. I know we've been answering questions here in the chat, but Noah, I've got one specific one that you might be able to answer. What happens if you pay the authorization review fee and then the product or system needs an additional assessment to close those findings? Would the provider then be required to pay an additional $5,000 to have it reviewed after the additional work is completed?
So in that case, it would depend on the findings and the amount of work and time involved. You know, if there were an issue with findings where someone came through the process and whether it was ready or full authorization, and it was one of the minimum mandates that we have for a control that needs to be closed out. If we see that as a finding within the review process, you know, ideally your 3 PAO has found that before that even comes to the PMO for review. But if it did come to the PMO and it was, you know, a finding, and we would be working with the service provider to say, hey, look, this is a finding that we have in here. It is a minimum mandate requirement. It must be closed out. Realistically, if that is something that's going to require massive re-architecture of your product, yes, if it's going to take that much time, you will likely have to pay another fee because you're also going to be having a lot of changes within that environment. If it's something you're easily able to fix and bring back, we will work directly with you and your 3 PAO to do everything we can to help support you getting that closed out, you know, because the goal for us is that, you know, your system's secure, you're providing a secure offering to the state or local government you're doing business with.
I've got another one for you here. What happens if the FedRAMP PMO does not allow access to the information for the product's ATO?
So if the FedRAMP PMO has a requirement that you're not allowed to provide access to that information, one of the options you have would be going through the StateRAMP documentation, filling it out for that system, having a 3 PAO conduct that assessment, and then bringing it through that process. You know, we've also seen, you know, there's requirements for documentation that you've provided for FedRAMP, whether that's provided to current clients you have that are not federal government. Depending on what your agency requirements are. And most of those cases, we're more than happy on the StateRAMP side to get on a call with you and try to find ways to make sure that your requirements are still being met while also still providing the information we need to make sure that the system's secure to the best of your abilities and ours, while not violating anything that the federal government wants you to do.
Great. Leah, here's a question for you. How can service providers interested in engaging a government sponsor, how can they find a list of current government members?
Absolutely. So our government members, we have a membership directory that is on our members only page. So as a member, you have access to the membership directory and you can see who's a member for our partner members, our government members, as well as our provider members. That directory is a great first place to start if you're looking for a government sponsor and you want to see who's involved already. The other place that I would recommend is just think about the relationships that you have already. If you've got a state or a local government where you already have a contract in place, talk to them about whether they would be interested in serving as a sponsor for you. If they're not familiar with StateRAMP, if they're not already connected with StateRAMP, let us know. You can email us at info@stateramp.org, and we would be happy to help connect with you or to talk with your government partner to see how we can help and if there's any interest in being involved. Those are really the best ways if you're still looking for help and you don't know where to turn after you've looked at the membership directory or you've reached out to those that you already are working with, reach out to us. we're here to help. info@stateramp.org, and we can work together to try to find a sponsor for you.
Here's a question for either you or Noah. How can providers begin the process of engaging the PMO?
Noah, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can. So when it comes to engaging the PMO, if it's general questions about the StateRAMP process, you can reach out to PMO@stateramp.org. If the goal is to engage the PMO for an audit review, that would be becoming a StateRAMP member, logging into the portal, and filling out the StateRAMP review request form on the website.
Great. And then if a provider maybe is not ready to engage the PMO to complete a full review or a security assessment, are there ways for them to get their products listed on the authorized vendor list prior to actually beginning work with the PMO?
I can take that one, and the answer is yes. So as I mentioned, when we were talking about the authorized vendor list, we recognize a couple of buckets of statuses, and one is our progressing statuses and the other are the verified. So if you're ready to submit a security package, you've completed your 3PAO audit, and you are ready to submit that security package for review by the PMO, then you're going to submit that form that is the PMO review request form. But if you have engaged a third-party assessing organization to conduct a readiness assessment report or a security assessment report, meaning you are in the process of getting ready, you can be listed under a progressing status. And there is a status update request form that you can complete. I believe it's on the templates and resources page. You can also find it on our members only page. And by logging in, if you're a member, you can log in and see that and find that information there. And our team will validate, yes, you are working with a 3PAO. You have to tell us who you're working with and we'll validate that. And then you can be listed under one of the progressing statuses of active or in process, even before you've engaged the PMO.
Noah, I've got another question for you. We all know that continuous monitoring data is very sensitive information. What protections are in place at the PMO to protect all of the information and data that is uploaded to the PMO repository?
Sure. Aside from the access control requirements related to the CSP, the PMO, and then the designated state official, the data is housed in a FedRAMP moderate authorized cloud instance.
One of the questions I know we hear, Noah, that you can speak a little bit about is, is it view only access? A little bit more maybe about the privileges or permissions granted.
Correct. So we have a folder structure in place for initial upload by the service provider. Once the review is completed, that is then moved into a separate view only folder, specifically for the authorized package. So there is a folder structure in place for the service provider to upload documentation as needed. Once that documentation is approved, it is moved into another folder where the state or service provider only has view access at that point, as well as for continuous monitoring. The service provider and the PMO both have permissions to upload, edit, review, and then all others are provided with view only access.
Okay.
One more question here. What is the process once a product has completely gone through the PMO review process? What are the next steps as a provider kind of rolls out of that initial PMO review engagement and the follow-up steps then to move into continuous monitoring?
So once a provider has completed that review process and they've received their authorization letter, the PMO will reach out to them and provide them with requirements for their continuous monitoring. It varies depending on the provider. If the provider is a fully StateRAMP audit offering, we work with them to establish their continuous monitoring from there. If they are already have a federal authorization, we do our best to coordinate with the service provider to make sure that we fall in on the current reporting date that they already have. That way they're not having to provide reporting on 2 different days of that month every month. So it varies provider to provider, but the continuous monitoring strategy guide is also available out on stateramp.org under templates and resources to help guide the service provider prior to that continuous monitoring phase becoming required.
Okay. Well, we want to thank everyone for being a part of our presentation today. You know, I think any of us kind of paying attention to the news today knows that state and local governments are certainly under attack. We know in talking with states and local governments that self-attestation checkboxes are really becoming a thing of the past, and there is interest in understanding vendor verification and to move toward a trust but verify as we continue to move toward cloud systems and digital government. So to better manage third-party risk, we know states and local governments are looking for proof, and so we're really excited about the opportunity to help all of the providers, as well as states and local governments, kind of pool the resources through the shared service model so that we can benefit together from a standardized approach, consistency, hopefully in RFPs and contracts moving forward, fewer one-off procurement requirements, reduced friction in that contracting process, and ultimately improved security for the states, the local governments, and the constituents that we collectively serve. So we just thank you for your time, your commitment to cloud security and improving cybersecurity, and for being a part of our presentation today. There will be a recording of this presentation provided to you later today or tomorrow. So look for that. You can also find presentations stored on our website at stateramp.org. And finally, these are a few helpful links if you're thinking about getting started or interested. I encourage you to go to our website at stateramp.org. You can join, if you are not yet a member, you can join at stateramp.org/register. Find future events as well as contact information. So if you have more questions, if you're looking to engage, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@stateramp.org, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you all and have a great day.